So welcome to our Resilient Diamond Heights presentation on shelter kits and go bags. This is something that we actually had done in person just before the pandemic started. But tonight I'm going to go into a lot more detail than we had time for when we did the presentation at the St. Aidan's Church. So hopefully you'll get new information that you didn't get previously. Or you're just going to get a reinforcement of some of the things that you already are aware of. My name is Greg Carey. I've been with Resilient Diamond Heights for about 12 years, and I'm happy to put these training programs together to help people become ready for whatever's coming in the future. So a quick history of Resilient Diamond Heights. Resilient Diamond Heights was started in 2007 by Betsy Eddy, in conjunction with St. Aidan's Church and the Episcopal Diocese, who was working on training material for preparing people for future emergencies. Our focus is on what we call all hazards. So we concentrate quite a bit on earthquakes, but we also are concerned about other large events like building fires or wildfires, heat emergencies, and any other kind of situation that might involve some kind of a emergency situation for a large number of people. We are affiliated with San Francisco's Neighborhood Empowerment Network, which is in turn a program of the Department of Emergency Management, which really means that this is something that is part of the San Francisco government, providing us with help in getting things ready and preparing with equipment and supplies and training. But the real focus is that this is a volunteer effort where we have people ready to help each other in the time of need. Our prioritization, especially in the training programs, is in household readiness. So we want you to have your home as safe as possible so that in the event of some kind of a disaster, you at least have the resources that you need for several days to be able to take care of your own well-being until the city has time to return to a more normal situation. We work with a work group, which unfortunately has not been able to meet in person since the pandemic 2.5 years ago, but we will be continuing to build out this notion of a work group where we will have volunteers that are trained to assist neighbors. And as soon as we can, we would like to bring that back to a person-to-person situation, because we know that that can be a lot more effective as far as assistance in the time of need.
Okay, let's see.
And we are also, Ronnie, could you mute the room, please? We also are working on a program called the Strong Block Program. And that is something new to Diamond Heights, but it's something that other parts of the city has already implemented. And that's where people in the neighborhoods will have some basic equipment and training so that we can have that help as it's needed on a more local basis. So that's a real quick background of Resilient Diamond Heights. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on one of the 5 brochures that we prepared. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you a link that allows you to download those brochures so that you have your own copy. Basically, if you have all 5 of these brochures, you have everything that you need to prepare your home for any type of a disaster or emergency situation. We really ask you to download these and print them out on paper, because during a big event such as an earthquake, it's very likely that you will not have access to the internet or access to power, which means that you won't have any way to get to this information if you don't already have a printed copy sitting there and ready to go. Tonight, we're going to be looking at one of the brochures, which is the one that's entitled Sheltering During Disasters. As I said, that's the one that we had covered just before the pandemic broke out. But it also on the inside has the list of items that I'm going to be talking about tonight. So you don't have to write down the notes about all of the information I'm giving you. Just download this brochure and all of that information will already be in the printed form. We aren't going to have questions and answers live during the presentation, simply because I have a lot of information to move through, and we want to hold the amount of time to about 40 minutes or so that we have time for questions and answers later. But if you do have some questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box, or you can wait and we will open up the ability for you to ask the questions in person later on. I'm going to ask Ron to put this link into the chat box now. This link is the one that you can use to download the brochures. What will happen when you click this link is it will take you to this page, and there is a button called download. If you click that button, it will pull all 5 of the brochures plus a few other pages, which are worksheets or other kinds of background information, so that you have all of that information ready on your computer to print out so that you have it available when you need it. So the link is in the chat room if you want to save that now. We will also have Betsy send that out to you as a reminder when we send out the note about the recording next week. If you are watching us on YouTube, which we hope a lot of people watch the replay of this later on, you will also be able to download these same documents. Just look at the bottom of the screen on your YouTube page, and in the description, you will find the link to be able to download the brochures, along with some other links that will be helpful because it will take you to some of the other training programs that we've recorded in the past if you want to catch up on some of the other information. So the learning objectives we have tonight is we want you to understand what is the difference between a shelter kit and a go bag. Through the years, there's always been a lot of talk about safety kits, but it's never been really clear as to the way these things fit together. We want to show you what you would want to include in your shelter kit as you put it together for your own home. We want to be focusing on the importance of storing enough drinkable water to allow your household to survive for at least 5 days after a major event. We want to then show you what is included in the go bag and how that's different from the shelter kit. And finally, we're going to give you a few quick pointers about sheltering in place beyond just these 2 main topics, so that you have a little bit more of a rounded set of information. Now, one of the things that I just want to caution you about right now is a lot of people have good intentions about setting up their safety kits, but they haven't really gotten started or haven't gotten very far. So I just want to start with advice that don't try to do it all at once. Because if you try to do it all at once, it might be overwhelming and you end up never really getting to that point where you can get started. So what we really suggest is that you make a checklist of the things that you want, and then build that out over a period of time so that gradually you are bringing these tools together in a way that makes sense to you. But if you try to say, oh my gosh, I got to go do all of this and get all these things, that can be overwhelming and oftentimes leads to some delays. Also remember that in the shelter kit and go bag, that you do want to remember to refresh the perishables in both of those on a regular basis. So that would be any food such as protein bars or food bars, batteries that have expiration dates inside of lights, and then any medication that you might have ready to go in one of these kits. For the medication, what we recommend is every time you get a new prescription, take the pills that were in the kits out and use those, and then put the fresh new medication in their place so that you always have the latest version of the medication. So those might help a little bit as far as just getting started if you don't already have some of these things in your home. So the first, I'm going to ask a couple questions just to give you some thought processes. I call them trivia questions, but we're not asking you to respond out loud. We just want you to think about this for a little bit to understand the importance of why we're doing this. First question that a lot of people ask is, why won't the city take care of me after an earthquake? After all, I'm paying taxes. So I'm going to just give you a second to think about that. And then I'm going to present you with this series of answers. The biggest reason is that after a major emergency, the first responders will be overwhelmed. And that's especially true of an earthquake, but it also could be true of a large fire or something else that is causing a lot of the first responders to be involved. Now, one of the things to remember about an earthquake is there will be large fires that are consuming blocks at a time, and that will be attracting most of the attention that the firefighters are going to be working on at the beginning, because they don't want those fires to continue to spread and end up being something as severe as the 1906 earthquake, where a large part of the city ended up burning. Also, the 911 system will be extremely overtaxed. So when you try to dial 911, there will be long delays, And that's assuming that you have phone service. A lot of events are going to knock out both your home phone as well as your cell phone. So the ability to dial 911, especially in the first few days, might be very limited. Something to think about in the city that might not affect us here in Diamond Heights is that high rises, which have large number of residents, will probably protect the residents from injury, but they might be heavily damaged. And one of the things that can happen with high rises is all of the glass on the outside, they call that the window curtain or the glass curtain, may all fall to the street. So you end up with just mounds and mounds of broken glass in the middle of the street. And the first responders are going to have to deal with getting that out of the way and getting that to be a safer situation. And then finally, oh, I have a typo here, sorry. More than half of the firefighters and police officers live outside the city. So in the case of an earthquake, if a bridge or a freeway is impacted, it's possible that half of our first responders aren't even available to help inside the city limits until some time has passed. So even though the city does have a lot of resources in place and a lot of training in place, it might be important for us to be able to take care of ourselves and take care of our neighbors for a period of at least 3 to 5 days. Question number 2 is, how will an earthquake or a major fire affect me personally? So when it says me, we're really talking about how does it affect you personally. Again, I'm going to give you just a moment to think about that and then give you some answers. The biggest thing that you're going to experience is a huge interruption to utilities, including technology. That means that there may be roadways or bridges that have collapsed or blocked, and that prevents travel, or especially it prevents emergency vehicles from getting to areas that they're needed. Power or water might be interrupted in some parts of the city for days or possibly weeks. And if your power or water are interrupted, it means that your household will suddenly be having to deal with situations that you wouldn't normally deal with, even when we had the shelter at home with the pandemic. Internet and cell service both will be spotty at best. There will be portions of the city that may not have any internet or any cell coverage for a period of time. So you can't depend on being able to get to the internet for answers. And you also will not be able to make calls for help unless there's some other method of communication. And then one thing to understand is that cell coverage and most house phones depend on the internet. So even though you might have a telephone in your home, which you might think of as a landline, if that telephone service is coming to you through Comcast or through AT&T service, that may be internet-based, which means that it isn't really a landline anymore, but it is part of the internet. So if you've lost your internet coverage to be able to get to the web, you also have lost your ability to use your telephone. So those are some things to consider as to why it's important to have resources available. So first thing we want to understand is, what is the difference between the shelter kits and the go bags? They're really interlinked. And in most documents that you read, it talks about them as just one thing, but it's important for you to understand that there's a really important difference between them. So the two things is that they work together in an emergency. If you're able to shelter in place, which means that your home is safe enough that you can stay inside, this is something that means that you will be able to shelter in place after the event. It's estimated in San Francisco that at least 60 to 80% of the residences, whether they are standalone residents or multi-unit dwellings, will be able to be safely lived in, which means that about 40% of the population might need to find some alternate type of shelter. However, you might be one of those lucky folks where you are able to stay in your home, even though there's all kinds of disaster going on around you. This is going to be much different than the first year of COVID. During COVID, we were sheltering in place, but we had most of our physical comfort and just well-being of the shelter working just fine. Most of us had power, most of us had refrigeration, most of us had things like television and the internet to enjoy. We were isolated. We just weren't able to get out and enjoy the outside areas. However, there is likely to be a loss of power and communications and water in certain parts of the city, and there's no way to know which parts will be affected and which parts will not, so it's better to be prepared. We can and should look in on our neighbors, and we might be somebody who needs help from our neighbors. So we really want to build this idea of caring for each other and looking out for each other's well-being, so that we can at least provide some level of help until the services get back to a more normal state. At any moment after an earthquake, we might need to abandon our home with very little notices, and that's especially because there are possibilities of aftershocks, which could happen hours or days after the original earthquake, which means you might have been able to live in your home in a sheltering in place situation for a while, but suddenly you now need to abandon your home with very little notice. And that's where having the essentials makes it much easier to get to a shelter and then later recover when things become safe again. So the shelter kit is the essentials that you need if your home is safe. That means you have the need for basic survival without water or power. And that means you need to be able to have enough food, water, medication, and fire suppression in the form of fire extinguishers, so that even though you might not have electricity or you might not have running water, you still can live reasonably safely. You're also going to need some comfort items. Lighting, especially at night, some kind of entertainment would be helpful. So if you have, for example, a phone with some music on it, you might find that that is your source of entertainment for several days. And then, of course, some way to stay warm, which when you're living in your own home will be the basic clothing, blankets, comforters, and so on. So when you are able to shelter at home, these things are not too big of a stretch other than lighting and entertainment. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Things we don't need on a normal day that you might need are things like safety tools, ways of dealing with sanitation if you don't have running water. We're not going to get into those details today, but they are covered in one of the brochures that we had mentioned earlier. And then you're going to have supplies that you don't normally need. For example, spare batteries, because you're going to be using a lot of things that need batteries. A manually operated can opener, especially if you depend on an electric can opener. If the electricity is out, that's not going to work. Just keep in mind that all of this stuff does not need to be in one place. So in the picture, we have a tote and we have a few items that represent the shelter kit, but you're not required to put all that stuff in one location in your home. You can fit it where it makes sense and just know where it is and have it to be available. The go bag, on the other hand, is something that you can grab if you have to escape your house very quickly. That would be if you have a fire breakout, especially if the fire breaks out in the middle of the night, or if you have experienced an earthquake and the building that you're in is unsafe, and you understand that that is because the building is creaking or it's leaning, or maybe there is severe damage, and it wouldn't be safe to stay in your home in those conditions. So what you need is everything that you need to get out the front door with as little time as possible. And that would be things like backups of your identification that would normally be in your wallet, basic records of your insurance, enough food and water to go to a shelter. This is not going to be the long-term food and water that we talk about in the shelter kit, but this is at least maybe a snack bar and a bottle of water for each person, just so that you are comfortable while you get to a place of shelter. You'll definitely want a flashlight and a battery pack for your telephone, for your cell phone. It's recommended that you have Mylar space blankets. Those are the little blankets that fold into a tiny little package, but are very effective in keeping you warm on a cold day. Essential medications that you might need if you're experiencing some kind of an illness. And then if you have children or pets, be sure to also include some of the items to keep them occupied and safe, so that you can make sure that your entire family is able to be part of the recovery process. So let's talk about the details of the shelter kit. When it's safe enough to stay home, this is what your shelter kit should include. So first of all, you want 2 fire extinguishers. Now these are the larger size. They are called 4A, 40BC. That means that they are larger than the little ones that you often find in kitchen type fire extinguishers, but it's good to have 2 fire extinguishers available at all times. You should have a way to shut off the gas if you have a gas stove or gas water heater, because it's possible that you may have some gas leaks and you don't want to have your safe home suddenly be a victim of an explosion. And it would be good to have some kind of a tool to pry things open or pry things apart. You should have LED powered area lights and flashlights. Now LEDs, that's light emitting diode, is the new style of lighting that is used in most of the new lighting equipment that you purchase, as well as the replacement bulbs for your home. But LEDs are much more efficient as far as battery life, and also have a much longer life than the old-fashioned type of light bulb type of flashlights. You should have in your shelter kit a large first aid kit, and by large we mean one that is family sized. You'll see in a minute that in your go bag you should have a smaller size available to take with you. You should have spare batteries for everything that's going to need batteries if you're without power for several days. You should have some kind of a food that doesn't require refrigeration, and that would be protein bars, canned goods, or other types of things that don't need refrigeration. Those are covered in the brochure that covers food safety. So we aren't going to go into details on that in this particular presentation, but if you look through the brochure on food safety, that will give you a list of items to consider for your storage. And as I said earlier, a manual can opener, because if you can't have canned goods and you can't get the can open, that's not going to help you very much. You're going to need drinkable water for 5 days. We'll talk about that in a little bit as far as detail. And then you're going to need the AM FM radio, and that radio needs to be either battery operated or one of those that has a crank on the side that lets you temporarily charge up a little battery inside. But the AM and FM radio is really going to be your only source of reliable information when you don't have access to the internet. You should have a sealed package of baby wipes for basic sanitation use. You should have a large container of hand sanitizer, because in the shelter kit you are now preparing for your entire household, not just one person. You should have some toilet paper. You shouldn't overdo it and empty the shelves like the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. However, having 4 or 6 extra rolls in your shelter kit is a good idea, just in case you're running low on your normal day-to-day supply. You also should have a package of large trash bags. We're not going to go into detail on the sanitation part of dealing with what you do when there's no running water, but look at the sanitation brochure and you'll have a chance to see the reason for that. And then some optional things that are probably a pretty good thing to have. You want some kind of a portable speaker system so that you have some music available, especially at night when there is no other type of entertainment. You should probably have a rechargeable battery pack for your cell phones, because they are only going to last for about a day before they need to be recharged. And some kind of entertainment if you have children, in the form of games or other kinds of things that will keep kids occupied. And there's of course nothing wrong with having adults occupied with some reading material as well. So those are the basic necessities of your shelter kit. And I will, since a few people arrived after we did the first couple of slides, I'll just mention that in the chat window, there is a link. The link will take you to a folder that has all 5 of our brochures, as well as some other materials that we recommend that you download today or tonight after the program. Print those out on paper, because during a power outage or an outage from the internet, you're not going to be able to get to those or any other material that you would normally look for on the internet. So this is a little movie that will just kind of take you through some of the things that I just talked about to reinforce some of the things that we've been talking about. So one question about the shelter kit is, where do you store it in the time that it is not being used? In an apartment or a condo, sometimes storage area is already full of other things. What we do is we keep our tote in the living room, in this little area between the love seat and the couch, and then cover it with a blanket that matches the rest of the decor. Remember that everything doesn't have to be in the same location, because when you're using your shelter kit, you are sheltering in place, which means basically you're in your home as long as it remains safe. So we have our fire extinguishers in two different locations. One is in the kitchen, and the other one is in the master bathroom next to the bedroom, so that we do have the two fire extinguishers, but they don't have to be in the same location as the rest of your tote bin. Now, one thing to remember about fire extinguishers, they will not put out a fire that's larger than a size of a wastebasket. So if you happen to be in a situation where you have a fire, you can attempt to use a fire extinguisher to put the fire out, but if that doesn't work, you need to immediately exit the location for your safety. A couple of other things that belong in your shelter kit is a battery pack that you can use to recharge your cell phones. This little device has a solar panel on it so that you can recharge the batteries during the day by just letting it lay in the sun for a couple hours, so that day by day, as you're using the power, you are regenerating the batteries so that they can still recharge your phone. The most important thing that you need to consider, though, is lighting. When there's a power outage that is going for several days, when the sun goes down, your home is going to be very quiet and eerie. So it's important that you have a source of light that is reliable and easy on the batteries. This type of light provides a lot of light and has different power settings for the light. By setting it to a lower intensity, you will allow the batteries to last longer. You will usually get about 3 to 5 evenings worth of use out of one set of batteries. But remember, you always need extra batteries so that you can make sure that if the power outage goes several days, that you can continue to have light at night. There are many different types of lanterns for your area lighting, but one type of lighting you might want to also consider is what's called a power failure light. These lights plug into the wall and have batteries that are constantly recharging, and they function as a night light when the power is operating, but when the power goes off, it automatically turns the light on so that you can find your way around your home in pitch darkness. Another thing about these lights is that when they are unplugged from the wall, they become a flashlight that you can also use the way you would generally use a flashlight. Keep in mind, however, that they do have relatively small batteries, so you'll probably only get about 3 or 4 hours worth of use of it as a flashlight. Its primary use is to help you find your way around. Now, one of the things I don't like about the design of this specific model is that it covers up both of the outlets when the light is plugged in. There are many different styles of these devices, and some of them are designed so that one of the outlets is left open, but you can shop around and find the one that fits you best. One last thing to consider about emergency lighting is that you need to have a flashlight near your bed, because you never know whether an earthquake or fire might break out in the middle of the night, and it also may be accompanied by a power outage. So be sure that you have a flashlight that's ready to go. And in all of these lights that we've been talking about, it's important that you get the newer LED models, because they have a much longer life of the battery life, and as well as the bulbs themselves. So if you have old-fashioned flashlights with regular light bulbs, upgrade those to the LED models and they will give you much better performance. Let me just make sure here that I have, let's see, right. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that earlier. I had to turn on the computer sound. And this little movie is about 4. So one question about the shelter kit is, where do you store it in the time that it is not being used? In an apartment or a condo, sometimes storage area is already full of other things. What we do is we keep our tote in the living room in this little area between the love seat and the couch, and then cover it with a blanket that matches the rest of the decor. Remember that everything doesn't have to be in the same location, because when you're using your shelter kit, you are sheltering in place, which means basically you're in your home as long as it remains safe. So we have our fire extinguishers in two different locations. One is in the kitchen, and the other one is in the master bathroom next to the bedroom, so that we do have the two fire extinguishers, but they don't have to be in the location as the rest. Okay. The internet is buffering a little bit. We might have to just give this a chance to catch up. Of your tote bin. Now, one thing to remember about fire extinguishers, they will not put out a fire that's larger than a size of a wastebasket. So if you happen to be in a situation where you have a fire, you can attempt to use a fire extinguisher to put the fire out. But if that doesn't work, you need to immediately exit the location for your safety. A couple of other things that belong in your shelter kit is a battery pack that you can use to recharge your cell phones. This little device has a solar panel on it so that you can recharge the batteries during the day by just letting it lay in the sun for a couple hours, so that day by day, as you're using the power, you are regenerating the batteries so that they can still recharge your phone. The most important thing that you need to consider, though, is lighting. When there's a power outage that is going for several days, when the sun goes down, your home is going to be very quiet and eerie. So it's important that you have a source of light that is reliable and easy on the batteries. This type of light provides a lot of light and has different power settings for the light. By setting it to a lower intensity, you will allow the batteries to last longer. You will usually get about 3 to 5 evenings worth of use out of one set of batteries. But remember, you always need extra batteries so that you can make sure that if the power outage goes several days, that you can continue to have light at night. There are many different types of lanterns for your area lighting, but one type of lighting you might want to also consider is what's called a power failure light. These lights plug into the wall and have batteries that are constantly recharging, and they function as a night light when the power is operating, but when the power goes off, it automatically turns the light on so that you can find your way around your home in pitch darkness. Another thing about these lights is that when they are unplugged from the wall, they become a flashlight that you can also use the way you would generally use a flashlight. Keep in mind, however, that they do have relatively small batteries, so you'll probably only get about 3 or 4 hours worth of use of it as a flashlight. Its primary use is to help you find your way around. Now, one of the things I don't like about the design of this specific model is that it covers up both of the outlets when the light is plugged in. There are many different styles of these devices, and some of them are designed so that one of the outlets is left open, but you can shop around and find the one that fits you best. One last thing to consider about emergency lighting is that you need to have a flashlight near your bed, because you never know whether an earthquake or fire might break out in the middle of the night, and it also may be accompanied by a power outage. So be sure that you have a flashlight that's ready to go. And in all of these lights that we've been talking about, it's important that you get the newer LED models, because they have a much longer life of the battery life, and as well as the bulbs themselves. So if you have old-fashioned flashlights with regular light bulbs, upgrade those to the LED models and they will give you much better performance. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about when is enough enough. The list that's in the brochure really covers what we just covered, and that is really the things that you need to be able to shelter in place for 3 to 5 days, possibly longer if you have a little more equipment. But the question is, well, am I going to need more than what's in the kit? One of the things that you may want to include are some sleeping bags. Now, sleeping bags do give you some comfort, especially if you do have to move outside of your home. But what the next question is, but sleeping bags by themselves are not all that comfortable. Maybe I would be better off if I also had a big tent that my family can stay in. Well, the thing to think about here is, are you going to use that tent for anything except emergencies? And if not, is it going to make sense to go out and purchase one? Because besides the fact that it's going to involve some cost, you're also going to have some place to store it. And if you take it a step farther, you might decide, well, gee, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable in a tent. Maybe instead I should get a camper, because that's going to be more like living in a building than living in a tent. And if that is true, then maybe you should just go ahead and buy a second home in Reno so that you can then escape to that instead of being in place. The point of this is, if you have a reason for a tent or a camper because that's something that you're normally going to do, consider that as part of your lifestyle. but it's not important that you continue to build and build the complexity of what you really need in your shelter kit. Just work with what you're going to need to be able to take care of your household until things get back to some sort of normal. Now we're going to talk about drinkable water. This is one of the most important things that we need to survive after a large event. Water is essential. We normally get a lot of our water from the food that we're eating as well as drinking. So when we're talking about the amount of water that you're going to need to store, it might sound like a lot, but when you're working with emergency rations, remember that protein bars without water can lead to constipation or dehydration. So you're going to want to have the ability to drink a more safe water, and you're also not going to be cooking as much or maybe at all, which means that the water that our bodies normally get from food is not going to be part of our diets. So what we need is we need 1 gallon for each person for each day, and we recommend that you have at least 5 days worth of this. So that means, as a quick reference, you need 5 gallons of drinkable water for each person in your household. Now, this water is only for drinking and cooking. It's not something that you should consider using for cleaning or flushing toilets when there's no running water. Those are more of a luxury during this emergency period. The gallon per day that we're talking about is really for basic survival of the people that are living in your home. Here's another little movie that kind of takes you through some of the basics about water.
We're going to take a minute to talk about water. Remember, the guideline is you want 1 gallon of water for each person in the household for 5 days. So if there are 2 people in your household, you want at least 10 gallons of water available, only for cooking and drinking. This is not water that you would use for cleaning or for flushing toilets. This is just to be able to sustain yourself. So how do we store that much water? Some people are going to go with bottled water, but keep in mind that the regular sized bottle that you normally find at the store is about one liter or about 1 pint of water. There are 8 pints of water in a gallon. So if you wanted to store bottled water for each person, you would need 8 of these bottles for 5 days, or you would end up needing 40 bottles of water. Now, if you have 2 people, you're going to need twice that much. If you go with the larger bottles, you only need half as many. So this is a 1 liter bottle, and so this is going to be about a quart. So that means there's 4 of these needed for every gallon that you need, which makes it a little bit easier, but still it might be a little bit difficult to find a way to keep those available and stored. Now, by the way, this size bottle, the liter bottle, is exactly what you do want in your go bag. You should have a liter of water per person in the go bag, and we'll talk about that separately. So if you decide not to go with that approach, the approach that we use at our household is that we have 2 places that we have stored larger capacities of water. We're lucky enough to have a pantry that is relatively deep. So what we've elected to do is at the bottom of the pantry, we have set the back part of the lower shelf to be able to store 2 large containers of water. So let me show you how this works. In the pantry, we have 2 of these large containers that each holds about 6 gallons of water. Now, the thing about this is that this is going to be in here for a while. So it's a good idea to put a few drops of chlorine bleach into the water when you first put the fresh water in to help maintain the freshness and prevent bacterial growth. Now, when you do that, remember that you must use the regular chlorinated type of bleach. You don't want one that has a special smell to it, or one that has no fragrance, because the chemicals they use to mask those smells are not healthy to drink. So you want to use regular chlorine bleach, and in the brochure it explains how many drops you want per gallon. But this now gives us, between these 2 containers, about 12 gallons of water, and that by itself is pretty much taking care of what we need as far as our water needs. While we're here, we're going to take just a minute to talk about food. We're not going to go into depth because that is a whole story of itself, but let me just give you a couple pointers while we're here. Remember that during a power outage, your refrigerator is only going to keep food fresh for about 4 hours. After 4 hours, especially meat or dairy products are going to begin to spoil. So in a longer power outage, you're going to want to make sure that you have some food that's available that doesn't require refrigeration. If you keep your freezer full, you will be able to keep the food in that part of the refrigerator good for about a day. But even after a day, if you have a longer power outage, that is probably going to start to lead to spoilage. So what you want to do, in addition to the water that you've stored, you also want to have some non-perishable canned goods that you can then use during a longer power outage. Now, the types of food that you want to have are the food that doesn't require refrigeration, and that would be things like beans or soup. Even though you don't have electricity, you will find that you can eat this and it will be okay. It wouldn't be as good as if you were able to heat it up, but it's still going to be safe and nourishing and allow you to get through that period without any electricity. And one thing to be sure is that you have a manual can opener, because if the electricity is out, your electric can opener is not going to work, and a lot of cans still do not have the pop tops. If you live in a detached home with a garage, you might have a lot of options as far as how you store your water. And that means if you're using bottled water or if you're using larger containers, you have a lot of flexibility. When you live in an apartment or a condo, things get a little bit more complicated. So you might want to get a little bit more creative about how you store the water. So in addition to the water that we have stored in the pantry, we also have some bottles that we have in the closet. Another option for storing larger amounts of water would be to purchase a few of these bottles that are used for water coolers. These bottles hold about 3 gallons of water each and come sealed, so that you can easily find some spots in various places such as this closet where you can keep these available. One thing to remember about the water in bottles is that the water that has sit in the bottle for a long time does begin to leach some of the plastic into the water. So you might want to remember to replace these with fresh bottles every 3 years or so. Now keep in mind that the amount of plastic that leaches into the water is not going to be a large amount, and you're only going to be drinking this for a few days. So it's probably not going to be that critical, but just to be on the safe side, you might want to refresh these bottles every 3 or 4 years.
So that information is covered in the brochure called Food Safety in Power Outages. Again, we recommend that you download all 5 of the brochures as soon as you finish watching this program. Print them out on paper, because you want to have a paper copy in case there's no internet. And this one also has an accompanying infographic that comes from the United States Department of Agriculture, which gives you more information about the safety related to a refrigerator and a freezer. So the details of the go bag is the next thing we want to talk about. The go bag is if your home becomes unsafe. The main reason that you need to immediately leave your house is if you have a house fire. So if your home is on fire, which might be in the middle of the night when the smoke alarm goes off, you might have less than a minute to gather all the people and pets and get out the door. The other thing is, in the case of an earthquake or an explosion, the building itself might be unsafe. And once again, you really need to evacuate that building as soon as possible for your own safety. Remember that aftershocks can happen days or hours after the initial earthquake, which means that you might have been safely sheltering in place and all of a sudden your building becomes unsafe. So that means you might need to evacuate quickly, even though some time has passed. So this video will take you through a little bit of more detail about the go bags.
We're going to talk for just a moment about your go bag. Remember that the go bag is actually part of your shelter kit, but it's the part that you can grab very quickly in the case of an extreme emergency when you have to evacuate your home quickly. That could be because your home is on fire, and you might only have 30 seconds to a minute to be able to get safely out of the building. Or it could be after an earthquake where structural damage has rendered the building to be unsafe, and again you have to get out of the building as quickly as possible so that you are not subjecting yourself and your household to injury and damage. So what's the go bag? It is something that is near the front door. It's near the front door, but it doesn't have to be exactly at the front door, but somewhere that's close to where you're normally going to escape. A backpack really works out well because it has room for enough of the essentials and is easily transported. So basically what's in the go bag is not all of the things that you have in your shelter kit, but it has the very essentials. One of the things that you'll want is a packet of information about the legal papers that you might need when you can't get back into your home. So this is going to be things like your identification, photocopies of your driver's license, photocopies of your passport, copies of your insurance papers, at least the claims page that would have the information that your insurance company might need. And it would be really nice to have an inventory of the items in your home that insurance needs to cover, including the serial numbers in case an item is stolen. The other thing that you want to make sure is that you're not going to take the gallon of water with you, but for each of the members of your household, you want to have a liter of water, because you want to have enough water to be able to get safely to wherever you're going next, which could be a Red Cross shelter or some other safe place. And you should also have some snack bars along with that. You're not really looking at sustaining yourself over a period of days, but at least enough so that you can comfortably get to that place of shelter. If you have any medical needs, be sure to have some of the medication in the Go Kit. And when you're doing this, remember to refresh every time you get a new prescription so that you always have the latest version of the medication, and then you put the older versions back into the normal daily use. And if any of your medication requires refrigeration, you'll have to keep that in the refrigerator until the very last moment, but anything else that doesn't need refrigeration. And if you have children, you also want to have a few toys in there, and you also want to make sure that if they have any special needs for food or formula, for example, that you have enough of that available to be able to get safely to the shelter.
So what do we need in our go bag? First of all, for everybody in the household, there's some stuff that you don't repeat. So first you need a basic first aid kit. In your shelter kit, you have a larger one because now you're in a place where you can have some space to store it. But you want at least a smaller basic first aid kit. You want one flashlight with batteries. You don't need to have several lights, but at least one so that you can find your way around. Again, it would be a good idea to have an AM/FM radio that either works from batteries or one of those that has a crank that lets you crank up a small amount of charge. You should have a small quantity of cash because ATM machines and the machines for credit cards are unlikely to function if there's a power or internet outage. So having some small bills available might allow you to make some purchases that you need once you leave, even if those conveniences are not working correctly. You want insurance copies of your insurance documents and inventory, as I mentioned in the video. And one thing to remember is to have a paper list of the main names and phone numbers that you need to contact, because it's possible that when the internet or the cellular service is down, the address book in your phone may not function correctly. So you want to have a paper backup of the main contacts. And then again, as we said in the shelter kit, if you have a battery pack to recharge your phone, it means that over a period of time, you might be able to continue to use your phone for a longer period without having to find electricity. If you have pets, be sure that you have a carrier for the pets and also whatever food they're going to be needing, because pets are part of your family. And just like the rest of the humans in your family, you need to take care of them as well. So that's for everybody. Now for each person, you should have about a liter of water. You can have a little less, but at least a large bottle of water for each person. Some kind of long-lasting energy bars or protein bars for nutrition, the Mylar safety blanket that we mentioned earlier, and a rain poncho because it's possible that it will be inclement weather when you have to escape. The medications we've talked about. The refrigerated part is if you do have some essential medication that does have to be refrigerated, you will want to try to get to the refrigerator if you can do so safely to grab those along with the more durable medications in the bag. You want a small bottle of hand sanitizer for each person. You should have an N95 hazard mask for either smoke or particle inhalation. And finally, if you have children, you want some kind of entertainment and formula if the children are still on formula. So those are the basic essentials of your go bag. So the last little piece we're going to talk about before we open up the questions is some things that are not covered specifically, but involve sheltering in place. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, the sheltering in place brochure is one of the 5 brochures that are available from our download point, and by all means get a copy of that. The first thing that the brochure tells you to do is be sure to start by assessing the safety of your building. You want to make sure that if you've decided to stay inside, that it is indeed safe, and that means making a physical inspection, especially of the outside of the building, to make sure that it is structurally sound. Having a communications plan, and there are 2 points to that. First, you need a reunification point where your household members know where to meet if it's unsafe to go into the building, and that's especially important if some of the people are at work or away when the event takes place, and they come back to the neighborhood and need someplace that they can either expect to find the rest of their household, or at least where some notes have been left so that they can communicate with each other. You should also have a contact that lives outside of the immediate area. And the reason for this is you may find it impossible to make communications locally because of overwhelmed cell services, but you might be able to send a message in some fashion to somebody living in some other part of the country. And it's important that everybody in your household knows who that person is and how to get in touch with them so that you can pass messages back and forth that way. You should practice an evacuation once a year, just so that everybody is familiar with where all of the equipment is and the processes. You can think about alternative power sources. We've talked about the power packs for your phones. However, you also may want to purchase what's called a solar powered generator. These are larger capacity battery packs that can be recharged during the day using solar energy. They're not going to be large enough to run appliances like a refrigerator, but they would be sufficient for things like CPAP machines or recharging your cell phones or other types of things where you need small amounts of electricity, but the main power is out. If you consider purchasing a gas generator, you want to use it with care. A gas generator would have enough energy to run a refrigerator, for example, but you have to be extremely careful to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning, and also because the storage of the fuel in order to operate that generator is going to be tricky. So it's something you may want to think about, but be very careful if you decide to go that route. And one last thing about the generator, you should never try to connect it into your main household power system. It has to be connected through a licensed electrician, because there's a chance of either damaging the equipment or electrocution. So if you do use a generator, it should only be used with extension cords. When you have lost connection to the internet, your AM and FM radio are the only reliable sources that you have as far as news around public shelters and other kinds of current news related to the situation. So be sure you have a radio that can operate without needing electricity. And the frequencies that you need to tune into are in the brochures, but it's basically KQED FM or KCBS AM are the two official sources of information when you are going to look for that kind of information. Now, what we want you to do, Ron is going to put a link into the chat right now, which will take you to a survey that we would really appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill in. This survey is only going to take you about 3 or 4 minutes, but it really helps as far as allowing us to understand how to do these programs better and finding out whether or not you find the information useful. If you are viewing this program on YouTube, there will be a link below in the written description that will be a link that will take you to the survey. We would love it if you fill in the survey, even though you've watched this on YouTube, the same as if you were able to watch this in person. So now we're going to open up the room for questions.